Hello everybody, welcome back. Part 2 of our consideration of what is social work. What is social work? In a minute, I'm going to give you some global definitions. There's a couple of definitions of social work that the international social work community have put together collectively. In my last presentation, I asked you an interesting question. Can you define our social work profession? What is it exactly? What are we? Who are we, so to say? What is our identity? I've been actually asking my students in Germany this question for a number of years now. Typically, very similar answers come up. My students often define social work as help to self-help. Then they might describe social work in terms of the client groups we work with. Say, we work with children and families, we work with older people, we work with disabled people, and so on. Other approaches, sometimes my students give me practice fields. So they might say, for example, children's services, criminal justice, services for drugs and alcohol users, that kind of thing. The international definition I'll give you in a moment, it really is quite different from many of these approaches, so I think you'll find it interesting. There are a number of international definitions, 3 to be specific. There's been 3 social work definitions put together internationally over the last 4 decades. Put together internationally by 2 agencies, which are really, really worth checking out. You might want to enter these letters into a search machine after this video. We have the International Federation of Social Workers. Despite its name, it's actually a federation of the countries which have national social work. And the second one is the International Association of Schools of Social Work. A university that trains social workers has therefore a school of social work. The first of their 3 definitions in 1982, it was very brief, very sketchy. It wasn't so useful for our purposes today. We're going to be looking more closely at the second and the third. The second is, of course, the first 21st century definitions. It's the first really modern looking definition, and it really was detailed and it was comprehensive. And here it is, our 2001 international definition. The social work profession promotes social change, problem solving in human relationships, and the empowerment and liberation of people to enhance well-being. Utilizing theories of human behavior and theories of social systems, social work intervenes at the point where people interact with their environments. Principles of human rights and social justice are fundamental to social work. So in a minute, I'm going to invite you to have another look at that. But first, my questions for you whilst looking at it, the strengths and the weaknesses. What do you personally find good and bad in this 2001 definition? What are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? One of the weaknesses that you may think of is to say that this or that is missing. So that's another formulation for my question. What's missing from your perspective? You can answer this from your German perspective if you're a German student. If you know about another culture, if you know about social services in another country, feel free to bring in those ideas as well. I'll give you some reflections from my British perspective. I teach internationally. I teach international cohorts of students coming from every country, from every continent. And it's quite fascinating when you have diverse groups to see their perspectives, which are equally valid to our Northern European perspective. So try and bring some global South thinking in as well. Think about people from, say, Asia as well as Europe, or maybe from African countries, from North America, Latin America, and so on. So think broadly when you talk about the strengths and the weaknesses. Let me go back though, there you are. Pause now and natter with your partner. What did you come up with? What do you like? What don't you like in this definition? There's a whole bunch of things that we can say. First of all, maybe it's nice to underline the strengths of this definition. I think it's pretty clever in what it achieves. The definition cleverly does not try to define social work in terms of its different client groups. So they don't talk about the different kinds of people social workers can help. This is, of course, a clever thing to do. Once you start listing client groups, you notice how incomplete your list is. You think you've got 10 and that's the only client groups there are. I can always find an 11th or a 12th or a 13th client group. So they don't try to define social work in terms of client groups or in terms of methods. They don't actually say what we do. Lots of our methods are quite distinct, social group work, casework. They don't mention any of these methods. So it's deliberately keeping social work broad. And this is the clever bit. If it doesn't mention the clients, if it doesn't mention the methods, what does it mention? The definition highlights values, what we find important. You know, what's our values, the things which really are our ethical orientation points. And these values are exciting. In fact, when I read this list of values, my heart beats a little bit faster. We've got social change, we've got empowerment, we've got liberation of people, we've got human rights, we've got social justice. So it's an exciting list of values. Some of those values are at the top of the definition, some come in right at the end. I promised to think about it from a British perspective as well as a German one. British objections, things that we may find weaknesses because they're missing. The definition stresses the caring aspects of social work, all about helping stuff, but neglects its controlling aspects. Now, in a sense, this is okay. I'm not proud of the controlling aspects of the social work profession. On the other hand, I acknowledge them. It's part of what I do. It's part of my societal mandate, if you like. So that's obviously an issue. Maybe it's intentionally left out, but maybe that limits its realism to me from my British perspective. Good. Another thing that I find missing, the definition does not refer to law or the legal dimension of social work, despite the fact that social workers typically use law. You know, for me, that's part of the definition of what social work is. Indeed, you'll notice this if you're a student. You know, we're torturing you with law modules. When I studied social work at my Fachhochschule, I spent a whole semester only doing social work law. It's something like 1/6 of social work students' learning might be done doing law modules. So it's strange to not see the word law in that definition. In terms of theories, it mentions theories in the definition. It alludes a little bit vaguely to theories that we may understand as being sociology, and it also alludes to theories that may be based in psychology. That's suggested by the formulation if you look carefully. What it doesn't talk about is quite specific social work theory, but again, it's close to my heart. UK social work theory has been dominated by ideas of anti-oppressive practice and anti-discriminatory practice. Both of these are all about diversity and working in diverse societies. The word diversity doesn't even appear here, so again, that's a potential omission. German perspectives, I won't say too much here. I think it's nice to actually, if you think about this and if you tell me, and that's one of the things you might be writing about in your task for this week's learning. But I will say German practitioners, academics and students may object to various aspects of the wording, various key German discourses and various key German disciplinary influences on social work are not measured in the definition. So there's some important words that I think a German would instinctively put in there, which really are absent. And of course, they're absent because the people who put together this definition are mostly not German native speakers, not knowing about the German social work scene. I mentioned my own experiences discussing this with a diverse group of students from different continents. They would have issues with, firstly, the lack of realism. The definition suggests that social workers find it quite easy to change people's lives, to bring about social change, you know, to protect people's human rights. My students might say, you know, this is exciting and it gets me ambitious, but it's more aspirational than realistic. You know, so they would say, you know, this is an ambitious definition, what I might strive one day to achieve, but it's quite far maybe from their day-to-day practice and their day-to-day limitation on resources. They might complain that it's too Western. It doesn't acknowledge non-Western traditions of social work or histories of social work. You know, if you come from an Asian perspective, you've got the history of Asian social work in mind reading it, you know, it seems quite foreign. Okay, so yeah, to non-Westerners, it has quite a foreign feeling to it. And again, to develop this idea, it's ethnocentric. Okay, so it's written from the perspective of certain cultures and not others. The definition strongly reflects Western values and Western practice. Quite specifically, North American. There's a North American model of social work, which we call the person in environment approach. And you can see it, you know, the fingerprints of that theory are all over our supposedly international definition. So that's a worry. Examples of this Western perspective that you get, It seems to be seeing individuality as good, for example. It seems to see social change as good, that's one of our values. It underplays the significance of the collective. And again, we could challenge all of these points. The point about social change, for example, we may take it for granted as liberal Westerners, how social change is a goal in our society, something that we support. That may be a much more controversial idea in different cultures. Good. So various protests, in particular the arguments we've had on my last slide, encourage the people to put together that definition, to rework it, to fine-tune it, to tweak it a little bit. And after a decade of use, it became clear that some real fine-tuning was definitely possible. And we created a revised version. So this is something like 12, 13 years later. To keep the two definitions separate, we give them slightly different titles. The one I just showed you was the international definition. This is the global definition. So a new name helps give it that fresh identity and helps us to separate the two. It goes without saying, 7, 8 years ago, the first definition that I presented was all over the internet. If you Googled definition social work, you would have found that immediately on thousands and thousands of pages. Now the old version has more or less disappeared. You'll only find it in books. On the internet, you'll find this new global definition. It's really quite recent. 2014 was its final approval. Like the older definition, the shorter, compact version I'm going to give you in a minute, it comes with notes, explanatory notes, expanding on the concepts within the definition. These notes really are worth reading. They're not quoted so much, but they're very much part of the definition itself. Here it comes, guys, the 2014 global definition. Social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. Principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledge, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. And they add, the above definition may be amplified, made larger, at national or regional levels. And this is obviously something that we can discuss about more, isn't it? Looking at the new or changed elements one by one, on the next slide I've highlighted them. What do you think of them? Can you explain the thinking behind each change? Are you for or against these various changes? And do the changes go far enough? Is there a modification, a change which you have in mind, which still hasn't found its place there? Those are questions that you can take away with you. I want to come to a close in a minute. Here's the version with the new elements. You can have a look at that and you can pause it there. And I'm going to come to a close. Hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Looking forward to meeting you all online soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for your interest.